Hello, bonjour, namaste, ni hao, and ohio, everybody. What is going on? It is Gale here. Welcome back to the YouTube channel once again for another Danmachi light novel video. And today we are here to review and break down Sword Oratoria Volume 13 as it has officially released in English last week. Now, of course, I've had to take some time to actually read it because I've been super busy coming back from vacation, getting back into work and everything. It's been super hectic, but I've had the opportunity to read it over the weekend and I'm ready to review it. So, of course, if you guys want to enjoy this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, all that sort of good stuff. Leave a comment down below as well if you have had the opportunity to read volume 13. What did you guys think about it? Did you guys like it? Did you guys not like it? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now, of course, as always, this is a disclaimer that this video will contain spoilers for, of course, Sword Oratoria volume 13 and, of course, what happens in the previous Sword Oratoria light novel. So if you're an anime only that's not experienced Sword Oratoria at all, or you've not, been able to read the light novels or play Danmachi or anything of that sort, stay away from this video. Come back when you've done so. Of course, I know a lot of people on YouTube like spoiling and they get a lot of views for it, of course, right? Which is a damn shame, because trust me when I say this, because I watch some Danmachi videos from other people as well here and there, I obviously get recommended some videos as a result of it, and all the recommended videos I get are all filled with spoilers. The title itself is just spoiler filled and it's ridiculous in my opinion. I just feel bad because if you're somebody who's looking for Danmachi content, the wiki doesn't help, the YouTube videos don't help, because both of them spoil you to no extent. It's crazy in my opinion. I really do believe people need to be a little bit better at it, but that's just how the internet works. People aren't going to be that nice, sadly. But anyways, that's besides the point. That is me being a little bit more annoyed at people for not being nice, but that's just how it do be. It's just how it do be, of course, right? Anyways, let's get into the video. Let's break down Sword Oratoria Volume 13 and, of course, what is effectively the aftermath of Sword Oratoria Volume 12. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that it's actually been quite some time since Volume 12. Now, of course, when it comes to the English version of Sword Oratoria Volume 12, it's been since 2020. We've not had a Sword Oratoria light novel since 4 years ago. And also, on top of that, if we take a look at Danmachi's adaptation, that was in 2023, early 2023 as well, which is over 2 years ago now. While we do have the manga that's actually carrying on with Volume 12 and doing Volume 12 content, realistically, if you're playing Danmachi or if you've been reading the light novels, it's been over 2 years, basically, since we've had anything in relation to Sword Oratoria. And not to mention, if you're looking at it from the JP perspective as well, it was about a year, basically, between Sword Oratoria Volume 13's release and, of course, Danmachi's iteration of Sword Oratoria as well. And so, there has been a gap between the two light novels and between the two storylines, and I feel like that hasn't helped a lot, to be quite honest, because frankly speaking, right, while I do remember SO12, because in my opinion SO12 is the peak of Danmachi, it's the culmination of an entire storyline basically, it is still quite a big gap to have nonetheless between two storylines, and people can forget a couple of details, right? Now, of course, going into Volume 13, it is pretty easy to follow up, to be quite honest, and I think Amori's done a good job with the way he followed up with SO Volume 13, because it's not like he focused on every single Loki familiar member coming out of SO12. He focused on probably the most critical one coming out of Volume 13, the most broken one coming out of Volume 13, and that was, of course, Lefiya. Remember, coming out of SO12, Aiz was in probably the best position she's been in a while. Mentally, that is, of course, right? Bet, was in a much better position as well. The likes of Riveria, Finn, Gareth, they were in a better position as well because they finally were able to defeat the main roots of Evilus, basically, and were able to, stop them in their tracks. But Lefiya was probably the only one to really come out of it broken because of the fact of Filvis's betrayal and, of course, her having to kill Filvis as a result of it. It was something that was obviously, quite damaging to her, obviously mentally and physically, you could say as well, right? And so coming out of SO Volume 12, I was kind of hoping that Omori would focus on Lefiya for Volume 13, and that's exactly what he's done. So Volume 13 focuses entirely on Lefiya, and it actually also happens parallelly to Volume 19 of the main series. So basically, when we see Belle infiltrating the school district and becoming Rapi in the school district and everything, that is exactly when Lefiya is also, being shown. Effectively, we're seeing Lefiya's point of view, and we're seeing her also with the school district as well, which obviously is very integral to her story and her backstory, because she was actually part of the school district at one point. Now, before we get into the school district aspect, and of course Lefiya joining back with the school district for this period of time, of course she's not joining permanently, but she's been given a task to be a part of the school district while they're here. Let's talk a little bit about what leads into her being an instructor on the school district, of course. And basically, early on, we see a little bit of moments of like, the Freya familiar situation and everything goes down, the charm aspect and everything. We see a little snippet of that. We don't see anything too major. And the reason for that, the primary reason for that, is because, to be fair, we've seen the major Loki familiar perspectives in the main series, right? We see Finn's perspective, we've seen Bet's perspective, we've seen I say Bet's perspective, we've seen Finn talk about Bet's perspective, we've seen the likes of course, also Eyes and Riveria and so on and so forth. And so realistically, there was no real reason for Omori to have to do the whole recap and basically do effectively a recap, like I said, and do a whole perspective of the Loki familia, because we've already seen it in the main series. So I like that we just saw a small snippet of it, and then the main focus was on what Lefiya was doing in the aftermath of the battle with Philvis, basically, and that is training with Bet into the dungeon. Along with that, she would regularly also do stuff with Lena as well, Riveria as well, and so on and so forth as well, do expeditions. So during the expedition of Lefiya and the rest of the Loki familia members that would participate with her, she came up one time and returned back to the overground and realized that there was a war game happening between the Hestia familia and Freya familia. And obviously, as a result of that, she also discovered that Belle was able to reach level 5 and saw his victory as well. And from that moment onwards, she started overworking herself. She started training even more. And because of her overworking herself, she also lost a lot of weight, which means that she also had to do something that elves don't like necessarily doing, which was eating meat. And the byproduct of eating meat is that she started to become a lot more curvier, as you can see by this image, of course, right? It's not the same Lefiya that we've known and loved for so long. It is a far more curvier Lefiya as a result of it. So that is the byproduct of course, Lefiya eating meat. Now, after the events of the Freya familiar stuff and everything, and her training with Bet and everything, a few months later, basically, we get to see her basically being invited to be an instructor at the school district. The school district is coming to Oratoria, and of course, one of the things that is quite interesting, of course, from an English reader's perspective, is that this would be our second time seeing the school district, right? Because of course, we saw it in volume 19, right, when the light novel came out last month. But the thing is, right, for a Japan light novel reader and a Japanese light novel reader more specifically, the events are actually the other way around, because volume 13 came out first in Japan and then volume 19 came out. So it's quite an interesting situation to look at, because of course I read the Japanese light novels. Well, I say I read the Japanese light novels. I read the compilations of the Japanese light novels that people would translate and stuff and give to us, right? And of course, so as a result of that, my first impression of the school district was from Sword Oratoria volume 13. And I will say this, to be quite honest, now that I've had the opportunity to read it both ways, in my opinion, if you want to learn more about the school district and if you want to figure out more about it, I would say that the Sword Oratoria iteration is a lot better, because it explains to you a lot more about how the school district works, what it's done before in terms of like how it was a part of the subjugation of the Leviathan, which of course it played an important role alongside the Poseidon familia, helping the Zeus and Hera familias take it down, of course, right? How the ship is powered, how the classes work, the people in the school district, right? Because if you take a look at volume 19, we only see a little bit of it, because of course for us in the main series, what the school district is it's basically a plot point to help us learn more about what's outside of Orario, you know, in terms of the dragon, in terms of the quests, in terms of everything outside, the monsters and all, right? And so there is a big difference there, I would say. So if you're wanting to learn more about the school district in itself, the way it works and everything, the best way to do it is by actually, you know, reading Sword Oratoria Volume 13 is my suggestion, is what I would recommend. Now, one thing I will say as well is the reason why Lefiya has also been invited to be an instructor, of course, is because she was an ex-member of the school district. She was a graduate from there as well, because effectively what the school district is, to reiterate and to remind you guys, is that it's basically a place for people to learn, and then when they go to Orario, they are usually picked up by familiars as a result of their techniques, talents, skills, or whatever it may be. It was a great way for talented people to come to Orario, basically, and an easy way. Lefiya is touted as one of the best students as well, of course. She was also, at this point, because of her being an instructor, forbidden from going into the dungeon and training with Bet, because yeah, she didn't need to be injured every single time. She had to go to the school district afterwards as well. So keep that in mind. Of course, after that, we get to see her going aboard the school district alongside Loki, basically to get herself familiarized with, you know, the current state of the school district, of course, right? She meets up with Elisa as well, who was her roommate and best friend as well at one point. And she was escorted to Baldur, who was also Lefiya's previous god as well. Lefiya also was able to kind of go back to a younger age as well, you know, meeting up with Elisa, you know, best friend and everything. So as a result, she was able to, you know, be a bit more girly with her as well, right? Which was super nice to see as well, because of course, at the end of the day, you know, you're seeing a Lefiya that's coming out from the battle with Philvis and the betrayal of Philvis, and she's a completely different character. She's changed so much as a result of that fight and that situation, which makes sense, right? But of course, you know, it's good to also see that she's still able to revert back to that more normal girl, you know, young girl, because at the end of the day, Lefiya's only like 15 or 16 years old. She's very young. She's about the same age as Belle, basically. And so as a result of that, it is nice to see, of course, it was nice to read that, of course, and see that, of course, right? One of the good things, again, like I said, was that we learned more about how the school worked, you know, in terms of the classes, in terms of how people were good in some ways and some people were good in other ways. Some people were better in other classes, some people were better in other situations. So it was pretty cool in that sense, of course, right? And we got to see Elisa obviously explain how, you know, Lefiya was better at combat always, while she was more talented in alchemy, and she was aiming to be a teacher more so than being a part of another familiar or something, basically, right? And technically, if you think about it, and they explain it a little bit here, is that a prefect in the school district is effectively like being an executive member, the second string of a top familiar, basically, while the teachers are the familiar captains and executives, basically. And we also learned that Elisa is also the president of the LFC, which is the Leon fan club, which thumbs up on that, absolutely there. But yeah, we kind of learned a lot more about Lefiya as well, you know, her past at the school district as well, which is pretty interesting to see. We learned a lot more about the elves as well, where, you know, they were raised, where they were born, and all of that sort of stuff. It was very interesting to see that as well, of course, right? We learned more about Wish as well, which was amazing to see as well. And then, of course, we got to see, of course, as well, how Lefiya was able to join the school district as well. And, you know, how she basically convinced her family that she wanted to take the entrance exam at the school district as well. It was pretty cool to see her backstory and how she was learning and, you know, just generally how she grew up effectively, right? It was obviously something you could tell is like how she was molded by the school district, of course, right? In some way, shape, or form, which is pretty interesting to say the least. It's kind what that backstory reminded me of, and how Omori portrayed it, is something very similar to what we'd seen in volume 15 with some of the backstories and stuff like that. It's the classic Amori intermission, chuck in a backstory and chuck in some more explanation of how Lefiya came to be, basically, and how Lefiya even ended up in the school district, of course, right? Being an elf, one of the elves from the Great River Forest, Great Forest of Rivers, Great River Forest. I can't remember what the forest is called, but it's one of those things, but basically from the Wishe Forest, of course, right? So yeah, it was pretty interesting to say the least there as well. Now, of course, as we progress on, you get to see, of course, her interactions with Leon as well. And then, you know, you get to see how Lefiya was kind of worried if, you know, she was able to even teach people and so on and so forth. But of course, the main thing that, you know, obviously Leon told her to do was basically just use and take inspiration from her previous teachers, which, I mean, if she's looking at her most recent teacher, I wouldn't recommend using Bet as an inspiration for a teacher, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, it is very rough in that sense. But anyways, it was quite also fascinating to read as well. I remember, I don't remember if we were able to read this in the JP version because I don't think it got translated across really well. But I think what was super interesting, and it's something that we actually can actually see it's kind of based in actual mythology, is Loki actually doesn't like Balder. So Loki familia was very difficult to join as well. So she would reject recommendations from the school district and only accept people that she was personally interested in. So that's how even Lefiya got in the first place as well, which is quite interesting to say the least. Now, to be honest, from this point onwards, realistically, right, it's very similar to volume 19 in the sense of you see Belle, of course, you know, taking command of the likes of Nina and Co, right? In this situation, we get to see the same thing with Lefiya taking over Nano, Luke, and a couple of others as well. Basically, a group of students, effectively, right? Teaching them and effectively training them, effectively, right? She was given effectively the elite unit, basically, as well. And how, you know, she was being challenged a little bit by the squad leader and, you know, saying like, oh, you know, basically being saying, oh, you know, being cheeky, being like, oh, I'm stronger than you technically and stuff like that, basically. But yeah, I think it was quite interesting to see that Lefiya had a squadron to herself and Belle also had a squadron to himself, even though Belle was under a costume technically. It was quite interesting to see both doing the same thing at the same time, basically, right? And so Lefiya basically was just teaching them effectively from this point onwards. It was very much super simple in that sense. It's a very simple story in the sense of like Lefiya's just teaching them consistently throughout the entire story. It's all about Lefiya just teaching these students and, you know, taking them into the dungeon, training them, and of course, you know, allowing them to explore the dungeon and you know, show them how the dungeon works and operates, basically, right? But then we get to see a little bit of an outburst from Luke, and this is where things get very interesting. And this is the reason why at the time I remember I was very much looking forward to volume 19, because the school district coming in meant a lot of things, and this to me told me about like, okay, yeah, we need volume 19 because that's going to give us a lot more information about what's to come. And that is, of course, Luke saying that Oratoria was, the world outside of Oratoria specifically, was being attacked heavily by monsters. Year by year, it was getting higher and higher and higher. And then the dragons from Dragon Valley were causing the most damage. And so for me, that was very telling that, you know, there is something wrong. The dragons are reacting to something, and that we're seeing the dragons getting loose slowly but surely. And so, you know, Luke was more so, and Lefiya identified this, Luke was more so annoyed with the Oratoria adventurers for not being able to save the world. He was dissatisfied that Oratoria was still not able to provide everybody a hero that they had effectively promised, you know, because at the end of the day, you realistically think about it, right? You look at Bell, he came to Oratoria to set up his adventure, to be a hero, to be an adventurer, and realistically, it's not happened. I mean, the whole idea is we've not had a hero since Albert, right? And since then, Zeus and Hera didn't really produce a hero necessarily. Erebus, Zard, and Althea tried to set up a hero. it didn't really work. They set up some false heroes, Finn, for example, right? But they didn't really set up a proper hero. It's only once Belle's arrival to Oratoria was a thing and it happened did we get a proper hero in Belle, right? Belle is the hero that we know is being set up, basically, right? But of course there are people outside Oratoria who are dissatisfied that it's taken them so long and it's taken so many years for it to happen. And Luke is one that is suggesting that he will be the hero that will save the people. But Lefiya was like, nah, dog, you can't be this self-sacrificial just yet because you're too young still, you're too new, and you're too young as well. And she realized that people around him were just going along with his recklessness, basically, which was very interesting to say the least. But no, it was very interesting, to be honest. I liked a lot of what was happening, of course, right? Because it was just a lot about Lefiya just, you know, becoming kind of like effectively learning from her past with Philvis and stuff and learning more, basically. But it was very interesting. It was very, very interesting to say the least, basically, right? And honestly, it was so cool to also see just Lefiya absolutely manhandle Luke, because basically Lefiya and Luke took each other on to basically determine who would obey the other, basically, and Lefiya absolutely handled him. It was insane to see. So good to see. Lefiya dealing melee attacks, magical attacks, all of the above was amazing to see. And then we got to see good old Mord pull off a pass parade on the group, which was classic Mord. That's just classic Mord, of course, right? No difference there. No difference there, absolutely. But yeah, it was good to see that as well again. And then, of course, we go back to a bit of an intervention where we get to see, you know, Lefiya, you know, traveling around Oratoria, basically exploring Oratoria basically as well. And effectively, one of the good things as well that we got to see was Lefiya's first times in the dungeon, basically being able to defeat kobolds, goblins. Remember, this is a level 2 Lefiya as well, right? But Alicia and Aki both had come to the school district and were able to meet Lefiya, and so from there they were able to obviously link up together. And then of course we got to see that Lefiya was actually offered the opportunity to join the Freya Familia by Hayden, and I think that was such an interesting moment to happen, of course, right? Lefiya being linked up with Hayden, of course, right? I thought it was super interesting to say the least as well. That would have been fascinating to say the least, because of course of how you know, Lefiya is now and how also the Freya Familia is, generally speaking. But funnily enough, there was this was in a cafe, of course, and the person who was running the cafe basically told Lefiya, nah, don't join them, dog, don't join them. But yeah, then we obviously got to see that you know, Lefiya was wanting to become an adventurer, basically, and asked Leon for advice, basically. So it was quite interesting to see all of that, basically, and just see how Lefiya could have also been a part of the Freya Familia, which is actually an interesting what if to possibly talk about, is what if Lefiya joined the Freya Familia? I mean, she wouldn't have had maybe somebody like Eyes. Maybe her eyes would have been Freya, basically. She could have been kind of like Freya in that she could have been basically treating Freya like how she treats Eyes, basically, is my guess. But that would have been interesting to say the least. It would have been very, very interesting, to be honest, as well. But yeah, I think it's a very cool what if that could be developed into something more, to be honest, as well. But we see the aftermath, of course, of the dungeon as well, and we see Luke, you know, learning more and wanting to listen to Lefiya properly as well. And then, of course, Nano is very annoyed as well, so because of course she feels that Luke is being seduced by Lefiya, which is quite ironic, to be honest, considering all things said and done, considering how this feels like it's Eyes, Belle, and Lefiya all over again in a way. But yeah, it's quite interesting, to be honest. It's quite interesting to say the least. But in the meantime, while this is all going on and everything, Nano effectively says, you know, that it's not surprising because Lefiya is a beautiful and noble elf. And then everything hits Lefiya at once, because when Elisa said that Lefiya had changed, when everybody's looking at Lefiya, they're looking at a Lefiya that is now chasing the image of Filvis. And this is where I think it was quite interesting, to say the least, because I feel like Lefiya needed to learn how she needed to, you know, be herself. She needs to learn how to be herself. And we actually immediately, and I remember reading this part and I was like, this is where I think Lefiya needs to remember that she is not Filvis. She is not Filvis. She shouldn't be Filvis. She should be her own person. And we see Loki actually talking about it as well. And even Tiona and Tiona are asking if Lefiya is doing fine. And they ask Loki why she's sent Lefiya to the school district. And she said Lefiya needs to learn how that she needs to remember her origin. She needs to not be the stubborn person who doesn't listen to others. She needs to let people help her. She needs to, you know, let people help her move her on, you know, in that situation. And we see even Ice being a bit worried that, you know, Lefiya is not herself anymore. But Loki says that's what she needs to do. She needs to just remember how she developed, where she came from, basically. And so that's the most important thing. And then we quickly swap over to seeing, of course, as well, how you know, Lefiya encounters good old Rappi, our boy Rappi, of course, who lets out a little bit of a scream when he sees Lefiya. And then Lefiya's like, hang on, I've seen you before, dog. I've seen you before. Don't chat to me. Don't chat to me. No, but seriously, it's quite funny in that sense. And Lefiya even said that, oh, Rappi is quite capable as well, which I thought that was quite funny, man. I thought it was really funny, to be honest, because obviously we know Rappi is Belle in this situation, right? So it's quite funny that Belle is like, oh no, I gotta hide, bro. I gotta hide. I'm gonna get caught big time here. But yeah, it is quite interesting, to say the least. And then of course they go down to the dungeon, and that is where things get a bit chaotic, unfortunately, because of course, if you guys remember seeing what happened in volume 19 as well, the dungeon has a little bit of an issue. I say a little bit of an issue. It starts collapsing a little bit, and we see in the at the same time with the Lefiya squadron, basically the same thing happened. The dungeon collapses, and as a result, they are stuck. They are basically stuck around the 15th floor, and both their squad and the Bell squad have been effectively trapped in, is what's the situation, basically. So on the side of the Lefiya squadron, of course, right, they are basically split up as well, unfortunately. Luke and Lefiya are together. They were able to escape the collapsed area. Unfortunately, Nano and the others fell down a couple of floors, effectively, is what's happened here. And so as a result of that, it has become a little bit more problematic, because now they're split up. They're in a bit more of a tricky situation there. But of course, Lefiya knows the area well enough. They aren't able to escape through Gnosis because, first and foremost, it's a secret, and the door is too far as well. Plus, they don't have the key to Gnosis, and they can't escape anyways without finding Nano and the others. So it is basically them trying to find the others, basically. They have to try and find the others. They've been able to split up their resources. Lefiya has half the resources, Nano has the other half, so they should be fine in that sense. But basically now they're trying to figure out what's the situation. They both try and head towards the 18th floor to try and figure out where, you know, where it's a safe place, where they might be able to link up. It's a very tricky situation, but yeah, it is a bit tricky in that situation. But it's quite funny as well that we get to see the aftermath as well. And then in terms of, not the aftermath, but like we see what's happening outside of the dungeon as well, with Baldur, Leon, and Elisa trying to figure out the situation. And Baldur is like, well, I'm just glad that Lefiya and Belle are in the squad, so it should be fine, to be honest. It should be fine, of course, right? But it is quite interesting to see, obviously, just the connection develop between Lefiya and her squadron, Luke, and them all connecting one another. The students also learning from Lefiya and using that capabilities. It's basically a lot of them just trying to figure out and escape the dungeon, basically, and try and reach the volume 18. Of course, the Goliath had already spawned when they had arrived on the 17th floor, which was obviously something that they were quite lucky with, of course, right? Thankfully in that situation, right? But obviously in that situation, nonetheless, Lefiya was also like, you know, Lefiya was like, hang on a second, maybe it's not yet done. And then, of course, Goliath comes immediately, which is great, of course, right? It's obviously fantastic, right? And we see Mord as well fighting the Goliath as well, who obviously did a pass parade on that squad beforehand, and Nano was like, we should help these people because Lefiya would help these people, and she wants to be an adventurer that can obviously, you know, face Lefiya as well, which is fantastic. I mean, it's quite funny that, you know, every time I love in Danmachi how every time something isn't supposed to spawn in the dungeon, it spawns in the dungeon. Plot points. You love to hear it. You love to hear it. No, it's quite funny in all honesty. So obviously these guys are taking on the Goliath, of course, right? And they face the Goliath, and Lefiya and Luke both arrive and are able to take on the Goliath. Of course, Lefiya is not necessarily strong enough to defeat the Goliath with physical attacks, but she has to take her on with magic, basically. She has to take her on with magic. And we get to see her, you know, get a flashback to a memory from 3 years ago, where basically, once again, you know, when she was a part of the school district, they decided to go down to the 18th floor, breaking school rules, which is absolutely fantastic. You always love to hear students breaking school rules. And then, of course, they face on the Goliath, and Lefiya was absolutely hopeless against the Goliath back then, of course, right? And so obviously that becomes a little bit of a problem. And then we get to see the fight properly begin with Lefiya firing Arc's Ray, immediately taking out the Goliath's right arm, which was great to see, of course, right? And then we got to see her also facing also some more monsters around the area as well, basically, which is quite interesting to say the least. And then we see the illusion of Philvis, you know, looking at Lefiya with a very sad face. Rivera and Loki talking about how Lefiya is trying to quit being Lefiya. Baldur and Elisa talking about how Lefiya is different from the Lefiya from 3 years ago. And this is the point that has been trying to make from the very beginning of this light novel, is that Lefiya is not the same person anymore, and she's trying to chase down Philvis and be Philvis, and she's trying to chase down someone she's lost. She will no longer be the Lefiya that we know as a result of that, which is a shame. And, you know, we see her thought process saying, you know, she's close to becoming like Philvis. She's close to being like Philvis. She's going to be Philvis. And it's like, she doesn't need to be. This is the thing. She doesn't need to be like Philvis. And at the same time, you know, she even thinks like, oh, if she sacrifices one of her arms, you know, she will be able to understand Philvis's pain and sorrow. And it's like, no, that's not, no, don't do that. It's so stupid. And even the students start reminding Lefiya of the teachings that she's given them before, you know, that adventurers should help each other and they can't win against the dungeon alone. The students start helping her, reminding her that Lefiya is someone who, you know, Lefiya shouldn't try and be someone else. She should stop looking at someone who's not here and look at the students that are there, the adventurers that are there, helping her. And even Baldur and Elisa at the same time are saying that Lefiya will always be the Lefiya that they know. Loki and Rivera, Lefiya won't be able to become Philvis by sending her to the school district as well. Lefiya realizes that she needs to be Lefiya Viridis, not anybody else, which I think was great. I think this was a really good story, in my opinion, of like how you should be yourself, not anybody else. You lose your family members, don't try chasing them. Yes, grieve, yes, be sorrowful, but don't lose yourself in the past. Don't lose yourself to somebody who's no longer here. And so it was great to see this just develop. And, you know, obviously it was something that needed to be tackled on, because let's be real, the only person who was broken at the end of volume 12 was Lefiya. And we got to see how broken she was at the start as well. So yeah, it was pretty interesting to say the least. And Then we get to see that, Lefiya is chanting, and then Aiz and Tiona appeared as well. It was Aiz, Tiona appeared when she was younger to save her, of course, right, as well. And then we get to see, of course, Lefiya taking down the Goliath in this situation as well, which was amazing to see, of course, right? It was very, very cool to see just the parallels between her past when Aiz, Tiona saved Lefiya in the past, and how Lefiya was able to do the same now with Nano and Emilia and so on and so forth. It was great to see, of course, right? And then we got to see Leon helping, coming down to the 17th floor along with Aiz and everybody else, and that's when we learned that his alias is the Knight of Knights, which is, of course, the alias of the level 7 that we knew was outside of Oratoria, confirming that Leon is indeed the level 7 that we know about. And then we get to see the epilogue where basically we see the Bell squadron together as well, and Lefiya got pissed off again at Bell by calling Bell as a rabbit in heat that is laying his hands on a student, which was hilarious, to be honest. And Bell was like, so don't call me that in front of Aiz and the others, which was great. It was the classic Bell and Lefiya bickering again, which was great to see. And Aiz and the twins were laughing as well, saying that, Lefiya would be fine as long as Bell is around. And to be honest, it was good to see, because Lefiya was... this is the one thing I really wish we see more of Lefiya in the main series, and subsequently Bell in the Sword Oratoria series as well, is just this development of Bell and Lefiya's relationship as siblings in a way, basically, because that is what their original relationship was in their previous incarnations, Argonaut and Fina. So it would be nice to see more of this in the story as well. And I loved seeing that, because even though people say like, oh, Lefiya shouldn't be irritated with Bell again, she's screaming at Bell again, and it's like, but that's just how she is. That's just how sisters are, in a way, kind of thing. And that's how she's behaving. And I think I like that in a way, And it's not like she's absolutely like killing him or anything, in that sense, which is pretty cool to say the least, right? But yeah, we get to see, of course, how, Lefiya, was still training the squadron a little bit. And then once the dungeon practice was over, her instructor time was also over as well. The 7th squad that, Lefiya was training said that they would join the Loki family in the future. Milia, Nano, Cole, Luke as well. And then, of course, Lefiya comes back into the courtyard waiting for Bet to continue their training. Bet notices that Lefiya is also back to her usual self, which is fantastic to say the least. But yeah, the funniest thing was Bet saying that he pitied Philvis since after her death, she's being used as an excuse for Lefiya being half-hearted and wandering aimlessly while using Philvis's weapon without permission, which was hilarious, man. That is such classic Bet bullshit, to be honest. It's so funny in that sense. Bet then tried cheering up Lefiya as well, but then Tiona were like hitting Bet as well for making her cry as well, which is funny as well. It was quite funny. That epilogue was really funny, to be honest, with Bet. But yeah, then we obviously see Lefiya finally, just kind of letting it all out, sobbing, screaming towards the sky, and then calling Philvis a liar and everything, and how she chose Dionysus over their friendship. But it is, she just lets out everything, and then she asks Philvis for her permission to use her weapons, or just keep her weapons at least. And then she kind of feels that somebody's nodding their head, and feels a warmth, which, yeah, means that, of course, Philvis gave her permission, which I think was very sweet. It's a very good light novel, and it's a very much character-driven light novel, because, of course, if you look at main series right now, we've developed every one of these characters and everything. We're focusing now more on the development side of things. It's always nice to get a character-driven story as well, a character-driven novel as well. And Volume 13 is the definition of being character-driven, and it is all focused on Lefiya remembering who she is, and that's about it. And it's done really well, in my opinion. It's done really well. It's a very tricky affair coming out of SO12. I've said this before, 4 years after the events of SO12. There's a reason why I specifically said that time. 4 years after SO12's release. 2 years after we saw it in Danmachi. It's not easy, bringing yourself back to a character that we saw at the end of Sword Oratoria 12 absolutely broken and demolished, right? It is a hard thing, because you can't immediately, bring them back and make them completely different and broken, or be all right coming out of it. That wouldn't make any sense. No, it doesn't make any sense that a character is broken a week on, right? The way Amori handled Lefiya in this light novel, in my opinion, was very well done. I think, in to be quite honest, I think he did it exceptionally well, because we got to see her not be fully broken, but we got to see her not be herself. You could tell that it's Lefiya, but it's not Lefiya at the same time. And then you slowly see her transitioning into becoming more like Filvis. And then it's like, okay, now I'm realizing what's happening. She's not broken. In fact, she's actually the opposite of broken. She's getting even more broken. And then you get to see her being pulled back by everybody, from her own memories of the past to also the people that she is with right now. All of these things together is bringing her back, and I think that was really well done. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say in regards to everything. This is the stats page for Lefiya at level 4, of course, if you wanted to check that out. Her weapons and everything as well. Here you guys go. That's a Dawn Crow image. There you guys go. But yeah, this is Lefiya's stat sheet. She is level 4 as well. I expect her potentially with the events of volume 15 and stuff, maybe we could see her grow even further. Lefiya is a very powerful character. People tend to forget that Lefiya is actually a very strong character as well. So we could see her getting an extra level maybe in the near future, but we'll have to wait and see. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.